The blood-red sun hung low over the rugged Arizona territory, casting long shadows across the dusty main street of Copper Creek as Cora Bennett stumbled into town. Her once fine dress was torn and soiled from weeks on the trail, her boots worn through at the soles. Beneath the grime, no one could have guessed she'd once been the daughter of a Boston banking magnate. That woman was dead now, just like her family. The year was 1875, and the West was still wild with promise and peril. Cora had fled east after the financial scandal that had ruined her father and driven him to take his own life. The subsequent shame had killed her mother within a month. With creditors hounding her and former friends turning their backs, Cora had used the last of her hidden savings to purchase a stage coach ticket as far west as possible. She hadn't eaten in 2 days, not since the stagecoach had been attacked by bandits who'd taken everything but the clothes on her back and a small locket containing a faded photograph of her parents. The driver had been killed, and she'd walked the remaining 15 miles to Copper Creek. The town seemed to swim before her eyes as exhaustion threatened to overtake her. The dusty boardwalk tilted beneath her feet, and she reached for a hitching post to steady herself. A man exited the general store, arms loaded with supplies, and paused at the sight of her. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a weathered face and eyes the color of a summer sky, he set down his packages and approached her with a careful stride. "Miss, are you all right?" His voice was deep, with the distinctive drawl of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle. Cora tried to straighten, clinging to the last shreds of her dignity. "I'm fine, thank you," she managed, but her legs betrayed her, buckling beneath her weight. The stranger lunged forward, catching her before she hit the ground. "Whoa there," he said, his strong arms supporting her. "You're about done in, madam. Let me help you." "I don't need help," Cora whispered, though she couldn't have stood without him. Her pride was all she had left. "Everyone needs help sometimes," he replied, guiding her toward the nearby hotel. "I'm Flynn Abernathy. I run the Double A Ranch just outside town. Cora hesitated. She couldn't use her real name. What if news of the scandal had reached even here? "I'm no one," she finally said, her voice barely audible. Flynn studied her face, his expression softening. "Then you're my someone now," he said quietly, with such simple certainty that Cora felt something inside her crack open like an egg. "At least until we get you back on your feet." He helped her up the steps to the Silver Dollar Hotel, nodding to the proprietor behind the desk. "Mrs. Larson, this lady needs a room and a hot meal. Put it on my account." The older woman eyed Cora with suspicion but nodded. "Room 3 open. I'll send up some stew and biscuits." "I can't repay you," Cora said when Mrs. Larson had gone to fetch the key. "Not asking for payment," Flynn replied. "Just doing what any decent person would." "There aren't many decent people left in this world," Cora said bitterly. "Maybe you've just been in the wrong parts of it." Flynn's smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Rest up. We'll talk tomorrow." True to his word, Flynn returned the following morning, bringing a simple dress, sturdy boots, and a coat that would serve her better than her tattered finery. He waited in the hotel lobby while Cora changed, studying the painting of a mountain landscape on the wall as if it were the most fascinating thing he'd ever seen. When she descended the stairs, clean and properly attired for the first time in weeks, Flynn's eyes widened slightly. Without the dirt and exhaustion clouding her features, Cora's natural beauty was evident: high cheekbones, clear blue eyes, and chestnut hair that fell in waves past her shoulders. "Much better," he said with approval. "Now, have you given any thought to what you'll do next?" "I need work," Cora said firmly. "I can read and write, I'm good with figures. Perhaps the Mercantile needs help with their books." Flynn shook his head. "Olson does his own accounting, takes pride in it, but my ranch." He hesitated. "My housekeeper left last month to get married." "Position's still open if you're interested." Cora knew nothing about keeping house on a ranch, but she needed the job desperately. "I accept," she said quickly. Flynn's ranch was 3 miles outside town, a sprawling operation with a handsome 2-story house. a large barn, bunkhouse, and corrals filled with some of the finest horses Cora had ever seen. 5 cowboys worked the spread, along with a Chinese cook named Lin who regarded Cora with open curiosity when Flynn introduced her. "Miss," Lin prompted, waiting for her name. "Just call her Cora," Flynn supplied smoothly, saving her from having to decide on a surname. "She'll be taking over for Mrs. Walters." Lin nodded, his shrewd eyes missing nothing. "Very good, Mr. Flynn, I show her the house." The housekeeper's quarters were a small but comfortable room off the kitchen with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a window that overlooked a kitchen garden bursting with vegetables. It was the first private space Cora could call her own since leaving Boston, and she found herself blinking back unexpected tears. "It's not much," Flynn said, misinterpreting her emotion. "It's perfect," she assured him, running her hand over the handmade quilt on the bed. "When shall I begin?" "Tomorrow's soon enough," Flynn said. "Rest today, get your bearings." Over the next few weeks, Cora threw herself into her new role. She learned to manage the household accounts, to oversee the cleaning and maintenance of the sprawling ranch house, and even to assist Lin with the cooking when the hands were bringing in the spring calves and needed extra meals. The physical labor was exhausting but satisfying in a way her privileged Boston life had never been. Flynn was a fair employer, never raising his voice or making unreasonable demands. He treated his workers with respect and expected the same from them. He was gone most days from dawn until dusk, working alongside his men, coming in with his face sunburned and his clothes covered in dust. Cora found herself watching for his return each evening, enjoying their conversations over supper. Flynn was well-read despite his rough occupation, subscribing to newspapers from as far away as San Francisco and New York. He traveled extensively before settling in Arizona and could speak knowledgeably about everything from cattle breeding to politics. One evening, as she poured his coffee after dinner, Flynn looked up at her with those sky-blue eyes. "You're settling in well," he observed. "I enjoy the work," Cora admitted. "And yet I know nothing about you," he said gently. "Where you're from, what brought you here?" Cora's hand trembled slightly, causing the coffee to slosh in his cup. "I told you I'm no one." Flynn's expression grew serious. "That's not true, Cora. I've watched you these past weeks. The way you carry yourself, your education, the way you speak. You're someone who's running from something." "Does it matter?" she asked, setting down the coffee pot. "I do my job well. It matters to me," Flynn said quietly. "Not because I need to know, but because carrying secrets is a heavy burden. Trust works both ways." Cora stood stiffly by the table. "Some truths are better left buried." "Like your name?" Flynn asked. "I respect your privacy, but I'd like to know who's living under my roof." "My name is Cora Bennett," she admitted. "I'm from Boston." "That's a start," Flynn smiled. "Thank you." That night, lying in her narrow bed, Cora wondered how much to tell him. How much was safe to reveal? The scandal that had destroyed her family had been headline news in every Eastern newspaper. Her father, Thomas Bennett, had been accused of embezzling funds from his bank to cover gambling debts. The subsequent investigation had revealed he'd been falsifying accounts for years. Cora had never believed her father guilty. The man who'd taught her to ride, who'd read to her every night as a child, who'd championed her education when other fathers insisted their daughters needed only to learn household management, that man could not be a thief. But the evidence had been damning, and rather than face trial in prison, he'd shot himself in his study one rainy April night. The scandal had broken her mother's health and heart. Within a month, she'd followed her husband to the grave, leaving Cora alone to face the creditors, the lawyers, and the vicious gossip of Boston society. How could she explain all that to Flynn? How could she make him understand the mixture of grief, shame, and defiance that had driven her west? And if he knew the truth, would he still look at her with those kind eyes, or would they turn cold with judgment? Spring turned to summer, and the rhythms of ranch life became second nature to Cora. She grew stronger, her skin tanned from hanging laundry in the sunshine, her hands calloused from work. The nightmares that had plagued her since her father's death came less frequently. Flynn continued to be a mystery to her in some ways. He was unmarried at 32, unusual for a successful rancher. When she asked Lynn about it one day while they shelled peas on the back porch, the cook had shrugged. Mr. Flynn, he wait for right woman, turned down many offers. Miss Harriet Wilson from town, she try very hard. Her father own bank, but Mr. Flynn say no. He's particular then, Cora murmured. Lynn gave her a sidelong look. Mr. Flynn say heart must choose, not head, not wallet. He paused, his fingers stilling on a pea pod. He watch you, Miss Cora, when you're not looking. Cora felt heat rise to her face. Don't be ridiculous, Lynn. I'm his employee. The cook merely smiled and returned to his task. That evening, a summer thunderstorm rolled across the range, lightning illuminating the mountains in brief, spectacular flashes. Cora had just finished darning a stack of socks for the hands when Flynn entered the sitting room, his hair damp from the rain. Storm's driving in some strays, he said, reaching for his slicker. Might be a long night. Be careful, Cora said, rising from her chair. The creek floods easily after these downpours. Flynn paused at the door, studying her with an unreadable expression. You know, sometimes I forget you haven't always been here. You belong on this ranch like you were born to it. Before she could respond, he was gone, the door banging shut behind him. The storm worsened as the night progressed. Cora paced the sitting room, unable to sleep with the thunder crashing overhead and the knowledge that Flynn and his men were out in the deluge. Near midnight, she heard hoofbeats in the yard and rushed to the door to find one of the hands, Mac, dismounting a mud-splattered horse. Miss Cora, he said, removing his dripping hat, boss sent me to fetch Doc Peterson. Flynn's hurt. Horse spooked at a lightning strike and rolled on him at the creek crossing. Cora's heart stuttered. How bad? Bad enough. Legs broken for sure, maybe ribs too. The boys are bringing him back now. Go, Cora said firmly. I'll prepare things here. With Lynn's help, she cleared the big kitchen table and gathered clean linens. The cook boiled water and set out his supply of medicinal herbs, his face grave. When the men carried Flynn in an hour later, Cora had to bite her lip to keep from crying out. His face was gray with pain, mud and blood matting his hair. Cora, he whispered when he saw her, trying to smile through his agony, sorry about the mess. Hush, she scolded, her voice thick with unshed tears. Save your strength. The doctor arrived shortly after, his examination confirming what they feared. A broken leg, 2 cracked ribs, and a nasty gash on Flynn's head that required stitches. He's lucky, Dr. Peterson said as he worked. That creek's claimed better men than him. 6 more inches of water, and he'd have drowned before they found him. The thought made Cora's blood run cold. For the next week, Flynn was confined to his bed, frustrated by his immobility and the pain that kept him from sleeping properly. Cora took over his care, bringing meals, changing bandages, and reading to him during the long afternoons when the hands were out working the ranch and time seemed to stretch endlessly. On the 8th day of his convalescence, as she read from a volume of Wordsworth's poetry, Flynn interrupted her. You've never told me why you came west, he said abruptly. Cora closed the book. It's not a pleasant story. Few of the best ones are, Flynn replied, shifting to ease the pressure on his ribs. I've told you about my family, my brother's death in the war, my father's drinking. It's only fair you return the favor. Perhaps it was the intimacy of the sick room or the fear she'd felt when they'd brought him home injured, but Cora found she wanted to tell him, needed to tell him. My father was Thomas Bennett, she began, watching his face for any sign of recognition. When he showed none, she continued. He owned Bennett Banking and Trust in Boston. Last year, he was accused of embezzlement. Flynn's expression remained neutral, encouraging her to continue. He maintained his innocence to the end, but the evidence was overwhelming. Rather than face trial, She swallowed hard. He took his own life. My mother followed soon after. The scandal ruined us financially and socially. I had nowhere to go, no one to turn to, so I came west to start over." "You believe he did it?" Flynn asked quietly. The question startled her. No one had ever asked that before. Everyone had simply assumed his guilt. "No," she whispered. "I don't. My father was many things, but he wasn't a thief. He was meticulous with money, careful to a fault. It makes no sense." Flynn studied her face. "So you're running not just from scandal, but from injustice?" "I suppose I am," Cora admitted. "Though what good it does, I don't know. The verdict of Boston society was unanimous. The Bennett name is ruined." "Names can be changed," Flynn said softly. Something in his tone made her look up sharply, but his expression was unreadable. As Flynn recovered, their relationship shifted subtly. He sought her company even when he didn't need her assistance, asking her opinion on ranch matters, sharing books from his surprisingly extensive library. One evening, when he was finally able to come downstairs for dinner, he asked her to join him at the table rather than serving him as usual. "You're not just a housekeeper, Cora," he said when she hesitated. "Not anymore." The summer nights grew long and warm. After dinner, they often sat on the wide front porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. Flynn told her stories of his early days in the territory, of cattle drives and skirmishes with rustlers, of the silver strike that had allowed him to buy his first parcel of land. One such evening, as they sat in comfortable silence watching the first stars appear, Flynn said, "I've been thinking about your father's case." Cora stiffened. "What about it? Banks don't run themselves. Your father must have had partners, employees who handled accounts alongside him." "Of course. There was Mr. Hargrove, the head cashier, and Mr. Simmons, father's business partner." "Why?" Flynn leaned forward in his chair. "If your father didn't take the money, someone else did, someone with access and knowledge, someone who could frame your father when things went wrong." "It's possible," Cora admitted, her heart beating faster. "But what good does it do now? Father is dead. The bank was liquidated to pay creditors." "The truth always matters," Flynn said firmly, "and justice, however delayed, is still justice." The next morning, Flynn sent a telegram to a friend in Chicago who worked as a Pinkerton detective. Within a week, the reply came. The detective would look into the Bennett case as a personal favor to Flynn. "Why are you doing this?" Cora asked as they rode back from town, the telegram safely tucked in Flynn's pocket. She'd insisted on accompanying him, needing to hear the response firsthand. Flynn guided his horse closer to hers, their legs nearly touching as they rode side by side. "Because it matters to you," he said simply. "And you matter to me." The summer days stretched long and hot. Flynn's leg healed slowly, but he gradually returned to his duties, though he tired more easily than before. Cora found herself watching him constantly, worried he would overexert himself. One evening in late August, she caught him wincing as he climbed down from his horse. Without asking permission, she took his arm and helped him to the house. "I'm not an invalid," he protested, though he didn't pull away. "You're a stubborn man who doesn't know his limits," Cora countered, leading him to a chair on the porch. "Sit. I'll bring you some of Lynn's willow bark tea for the pain." Flynn caught her hand as she turned to leave. "Cora," he said softly, "thank you for caring." Their eyes met, and something electric passed between them. Flynn's hand was warm around hers, calloused but gentle. For a moment, Cora thought he might pull her closer, but the sound of approaching horses broke the spell. It was Harriet Wilson and her father, the banker from town. Harriet was a beautiful blonde woman with a determined smile and expensive riding clothes. She dismounted gracefully, handing her reins to her father. "Flynn," she called, ascending the porch steps. "We were just passing by and thought we'd stop in." Her eyes slid to Cora, taking in her simple work dress and the way she stood near Flynn's chair. "Oh, I didn't realize you had company." "Miss Wilson," Flynn nodded politely. "Mr. Wilson, this is Cora Bennett, my housekeeper." The word stung more than Cora expected it to. She nodded politely and excused herself to prepare refreshments. feeling Harriet's triumphant gaze follow her into the house. From the kitchen window, she watched as Harriet seated herself in the chair Cora had vacated, leaning toward Flynn with practiced charm. Mr. Wilson stood at the porch railing, gesturing expansively as he talked, probably discussing business or politics. "Miss Wilson come often," Lynn observed, appearing silently at Cora's elbow. "Her father want merger. Business and personal, I think." "It would be a sensible match," Cora said, trying to keep her voice neutral. "Her father owns the bank. Flynn could expand his operation." Lynn snorted. "Mr. Flynn not sensible about heart things." The Wilsons stayed for dinner, Harriet expertly dominating the conversation with tales of her recent trip to San Francisco. Cora served the meal and then retreated to her room, unable to bear watching Harriet's obvious pursuit of Flynn. Later that night, unable to sleep, she slipped outside to sit on the back porch steps. The night was clear, stars scattered across the velvet sky like diamonds on black velvet. She heard the door open behind her but didn't turn. "Couldn't sleep either?" Flynn asked, easing himself down beside her. "It's too beautiful a night to waste on sleep," Cora replied, gesturing toward the stars. They sat in silence for a few moments before Flynn said, "Harriet Wilson wants me to escort her to the harvest dance next month." Cora's heart sank, but she kept her voice light. "She's very beautiful." "Yes," Flynn agreed, "and very aware of it." He turned to look at Cora, his face half illuminated by moonlight. "I told her I was already escorting someone else." "Oh," Cora tried to ignore the leap of hope in her chest. "One of the young ladies from town," Flynn smiled slowly. "No. A stubborn, brave woman who came west with nothing but her courage and built a new life." He reached for her hand. "I'd like to escort you, Cora, if you'll have me." Cora's breath caught. "People will talk, the rancher and his housekeeper." "Let them," Flynn shrugged. "I've never much cared what people think." "Have you? After everything you've been through?" Cora thought about Boston society, about the whispers and pointed fingers, about the so-called friends who'd abandoned her family in their time of need. "No," she said finally. "I suppose I don't." The day of the harvest dance arrived with perfect early autumn weather, the aspen trees beginning to turn gold on the mountainsides. Cora wore the new dress Flynn had insisted on buying her in town, a deep blue that matched her eyes, with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. The town hall was decorated with autumn leaves and hay bales, a local fiddle band playing cheerful tunes in the corner. When Flynn led Cora onto the dance floor for a waltz, she was acutely aware of the curious stares and whispers. "Everyone's watching us," she murmured as Flynn guided her skillfully through the steps. "They're watching you," he corrected, "because you're the most beautiful woman in the room." Harriet Wilson certainly didn't share his opinion. She cut them directly on the refreshment line, her smile brittle as glass. "Flynn, I hardly recognized you. You clean up so well when you make an effort." Her gaze raked over Cora. "And Miss Bennett, was it? How quaint that you've joined us tonight." Before Cora could respond, Flynn stepped slightly forward, his hand at the small of her back. "Miss Bennett honors me with her company," he said, his voice pleasant but firm. "If you'll excuse us, I believe this is our dance." Harriet's face flushed an unbecoming red as they moved away. "That was unkind," Cora whispered, though she couldn't help feeling a small surge of triumph. "Harriet will survive the disappointment," Flynn replied dryly. "She's had plenty of practice. Her feelings for me extend only to my bank account and land holdings." The evening passed in a whirl of music and laughter. Flynn introduced Cora to his neighbors and business associates, his hand rarely leaving hers. By the time they climbed into his wagon for the ride home, Cora's cheeks ached from smiling. Under the blanket of stars, Flynn stopped the wagon on a rise overlooking the valley, the lights of Copper Creek twinkling below. "I had a telegram from Chicago today," he said, turning to face her. "Richard Hargrove, your father's head cashier, has just purchased a shipping company in New York." "Paid cash?" Cora's heart began to race. "That's impossible. Mr. Hargrove was always complaining about his modest salary." "My friend is looking deeper," Flynn continued. Bank records, property purchases. If there's evidence to clear your father's name, he'll find it. Even if he does, it won't bring my parents back, Cora said softly. No, Flynn agreed, but it might bring you peace and restore your family's honor. Cora felt tears prick her eyes. Why are you doing all this for me? Flynn reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. Because from the moment you stumbled into Copper Creek, something in me recognized something in you. When you said you were no one, I knew it wasn't true. You were someone who needed to be seen, to be known. And now, Cora whispered. Now you're the woman I love, Flynn said simply. The woman I want to build a life with if you'll have me, Cora's breath caught. Flynn, you don't have to answer now, he said quickly. I know it's sudden. I know there's still much to resolve, but I wanted you to know where I stand. He picked up the reins and clicked to the horses, ending the conversation, but Cora's mind whirled with possibilities she'd never dared to consider. The telegram arrived 3 weeks later, delivered by a breathless young boy from town. Flynn read it silently, his expression growing grave. He handed it to Cora without a word. Evidence found Stop Hargrove falsified records. Stop stole funds over 5 years. Stop framed Bennett. When discovered, Stop report sent to Boston authorities. Stop. Cora's hands trembled as she read the words that vindicated her father. He was innocent, she whispered. I always knew it. Flynn nodded. My friend says the Boston papers will run the story within the week. Your father's name will be cleared publicly. Thank you, Cora said, tears streaming down her face. I can never repay you for this. I don't want repayment, Flynn said quietly. I just want you, not as my housekeeper, as my wife. Time seemed to stop as Cora looked into his earnest blue eyes. This man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved, who had believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself, who had restored not just her father's honor but her faith in humanity. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I will marry you. Flynn's face broke into a radiant smile as he pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in his enthusiasm. When he set her down, he cupped her face in his hands. I loved you from the moment you said you were no one, he told her, because I could see exactly who you were: brave, proud, undefeated. And now, Cora asked, echoing their earlier conversation. Now you're my everything, Flynn replied, before lowering his lips to hers. They were married in the little white church in Copper Creek the following spring, when the meadows were carpeted with wildflowers and the aspens wore their fresh green leaves. Lynn prepared a feast, and the ranch hands constructed long tables in the yard, where neighbors and friends gathered to celebrate. Even Harriet Wilson came, escorted by a wealthy cattle buyer from Texas, her engagement ring prominently displayed. She offered stiff congratulations and moved quickly on to more congenial company. As the sun set on their wedding day, Flynn led Cora away from the festivities to the hilltop where he'd first told her he loved her. In the distance, the mountains were bathed in golden light, the valley spread below them like a patchwork quilt. Happy? Flynn asked, his arm around her waist. More than I ever thought possible, Cora replied honestly. When I arrived here, I thought my life was over. I had no name, no family, no future. And now, Cora turned in his arms, resting her hands on his chest. Now I have everything. A name I'm proud to bear, a home, a husband who sees me for who I truly am. And who is that? Flynn asked with a smile. I'm Cora Abernathy, she said firmly. And I belong right here with you. As twilight deepened around them, Flynn kissed his bride beneath the first stars of evening, both of them secure in the knowledge that they had found in each other what most people spend a lifetime seeking. Someone who knows your true worth, even when you've forgotten it yourself. Over the years that followed, the double ranch prospered under their joint stewardship. Cora's financial acumen complemented Flynn's practical knowledge of cattle and horses, allowing them to expand their holdings and become one of the most successful operations in the territory. 2 years after their marriage, Cora gave birth to a son they named Thomas after her father. A daughter, Elizabeth, followed 2 years later. The house that had once seemed too large for Flynn alone now rang with children's laughter and the bustle of family life. When the children were old enough to understand, Cora told them the story of their grandfather in Boston, how he had been wrongly accused and how Flynn had helped clear his name. She showed them the newspaper clippings announcing Richard Hargrove's conviction for embezzlement and the posthumous exoneration of Thomas Bennett. "Your father is the most honorable man I've ever known," she told them one evening as they sat on the porch watching Flynn check the horses in the corral. "He taught me that true worth isn't measured in money or social standing, but in how we treat others, especially those who can do nothing for us in return." As Arizona moved toward statehood in the late 1880s, Flynn became involved in territorial politics, advocating for the rights of small ranchers against the encroachment of large cattle barons and railroad interests. Cora supported his efforts, hosting meetings in their home and using her education to help draft legislation. They faced challenges, of course, drought years when the cattle grew thin and water was precious. The winter of '89 when blizzards claimed half their herd. The summer Elizabeth fell ill with fever and they feared for her life. But through it all, they faced each trial together, their partnership only strengthening with time. On their 20th anniversary, Flynn surprised Cora with a trip to San Francisco, leaving the children, now teenagers, in Lynn's capable care. They stayed in a grand hotel overlooking the bay, attended the opera, and dined in elegant restaurants where no one knew their history or cared about the scandal that had once defined Cora's life. On their final evening, as they walked along the waterfront watching the ships come in, Flynn asked, "Any regrets about the path your life has taken?" Cora considered the question seriously. "I regret that my parents didn't live to see their name cleared. I regret that they never met you or the children." She squeezed his hand. "But I don't regret coming west. I don't regret stumbling into Copper Creek that day, half dead from exhaustion. And I certainly don't regret telling a handsome cowboy that I was no one." Flynn's laugh echoed across the water. "Best thing you ever said to me. Gave me the perfect opening." As they returned to Arizona and resumed the rhythm of ranch life, Cora often reflected on the strange twist of fate that had brought her west. The scandal that had seemed like the end of everything had actually been the beginning. Had her father's name never been tarnished, she would have married some proper Boston gentleman and lived a comfortable, predictable life. She would never have known the exhilaration of building something from nothing, of earning respect through hard work rather than inheritance, of loving a man who valued her mind and spirit as much as her beauty. When Thomas left for college in Denver and Elizabeth announced her engagement to the son of a neighboring rancher, Cora and Flynn found themselves alone again, just as they had been at the beginning. But now their home was filled with memories, their lives enriched by the community they'd helped build, their love deepened by shared joys and sorrows. One evening, as they sat on their porch watching another spectacular Arizona sunset, Flynn took her hand. "Remember what I told you that first day?" "When you said you were no one," Cora smiled, the memory as clear as if it had happened yesterday rather than nearly 3 decades ago. "You said I was your someone." "Best decision I ever made," Flynn said, his voice gruff with emotion, "making you mine." Cora leaned her head against his shoulder, watching as the first star appeared in the darkening sky. "We made each other whole," she said softly. "That's the true gift of love." And as night fell over the ranch they'd built together, Cora Abernathy knew with absolute certainty that she had found her place in the world not in the drawing rooms of Boston, but here in the wild Arizona territory, with a man who had seen her true worth when she'd forgotten it herself.